Welcome to the Rural Social Worker. I'm Andrea, and this is episode 5, Cultivating Change, Empowering Indigenous Communities Through Rural Social Work. And we have a guest here on today, Daniel Spaulding from the Nez Perce Tribe. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, Tatslahin Oiklo, Inamonik Tuas Atsik Nimi Putimki, Metusea Putimki Inwanikisa Daniel Spaulding, Inwas Nimi Puka Laloit Swas, Inwas Slapway Kanich, Ka Intaita Slapwaypa. Hello, everybody. I introduced myself in the Nez Perce language, which is something that's very common for us to do. I said my name is Atsi, which means turtle in the Nez Perce language, but in English, I am Daniel Spaulding. I am a proud member of the Nimipu Nation, or federally known as the Nez Perce Tribe of Idaho. I am born and raised here on the Nez Perce Reservation in Lapwai. Other than that, what else? I don't know what else you want me to say. I work for my tribe's radio station. I'm the coordinator for KIYE, the Nez Perce Tribal Radio Station out of Kamyai. I've been in this job for about 8 years now, and so my main focus is always to amplify and uplift Indigenous perspectives through media.
Great. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of recognizing the Indigenous perspectives, a little bit about the language and the culture and the importance of highlighting the unique dynamics and challenges of Indigenous communities, both in general, but also in the rural context. So if you want to talk a little bit about that and growing up there.
Yeah, so growing up in Lapwai, I mean, we're this small little town, in the, I guess, what do we call this? Like the middle north of Idaho. I always feel so weird when people ask where I'm from in Idaho. I'm like, well, we're not like super north, but we're not like southern. Like we're just like in the middle. Usually I always have to explain.
A little cutout on Idaho.
Yeah.
A little cutout. We're just in that little dot.
A lot of people always recognize it like, oh, is it by the town that stinks? And I'm like, yeah, Lewiston. Yeah, like people always do that. And I'm like, yeah, But yeah, growing up in Lapwai, it's such a super tight-knit community. Everyone knows everyone. Majority of everyone's somewhat related or has those ties to each other as a smaller tribe. I feel like growing up in rural Idaho, you're exposed to things that I feel like most kids probably aren't at such a young age. Like, for example, for me, I can remember as being like a young kid in elementary experiencing racism, during basketball games and things like that, which I feel, is something that kids probably shouldn't be experiencing, but it happens. But I do feel like my community is very, like, we're a small community, but we're a very strong community. I feel like whenever times get tough, our community always comes together and supports whatever family's going through something through a tough time. And I think that makes it probably one of the best things about being from Lapwai. And I don't even think I feel like you don't have to be native either to be from Lapwai, because we have a lot of non-native people who live in our community as well, who are community members and, people have taken in and loved and grew up. So, I don't know. I think being from I always say this all the time. People probably get mad, but I say like being from Lapwai is top tier. Like it's just one of the best experiences I've ever had, and I feel like it's made me who I am today. Everything I do and anything that I do is always, with my community in the back of my mind of like, how could I represent my community well, and how could I, bring awareness to things that people don't know about my community. So,
yeah, growing up there myself, I remember, my friends would be like, well, you're native, you count, because our family grew up there. We've been there for generations. And with my mom teaching at the high school, it was just like, no, you just are, and was always fundraisers going on all the time. And so I do love that about Lapwai, of how the community really comes together. And I think that's more common in rural communities in general than it is in the urban setting. And so I remember even growing up, and we would take Nez Perce language classes, and it didn't matter if you were white or you were native or, whatever it was. And we learned how to grass dance, I remember, in like 4th grade for Native American History Month. That was fun. What is I wanted you to talk more about the culture and like the powwows and stuff like that, and maybe some of that stuff.
Yeah, so growing up, I used to dance when I was a kid, but I stopped after. So like in our culture, when we lose a loved one, usually you stop practicing like the customs for a year until the memorial until and so when I lost my cousin when I was in kindergarten is when I stopped dancing. That's when I cut my hair and I stopped dancing. And I just never picked it back up. I probably should have, but I don't know. Maybe I just wasn't for me to be a powwow native, I guess. But and I think too, a lot of people, especially people who aren't familiar with native culture, see powwows as this like super sacred like ceremony. And don't get me excuse me, don't get me wrong, there are some ceremonies that happen in powwows, but it's a social gathering, so a lot of it's not as like, I feel like, because I have quite a few non-native friends who are like, can I go to a powwow, like is it okay for me to go, I'm not native. I'm like, yeah, you can come. Like it's a social gathering. It's a time for to be in community with our own and guests. And there's always like, I feel like too, when non like community members are at the powwow, they always kind of get terrorized too. Like, come on, get out here and dance, or like we're just very, I don't know, I guess welcoming in that way. But so I do think there is etiquette though going to a powwow. Like you don't want to go and like touch someone's regalia without asking, or taking pictures or video recording without asking, or don't touch people's like feathers, or there's a lot of significance behind a regalia. So I think if you do go, you do have to be respectful of that, like knowing like, okay, maybe I shouldn't take a picture or record or ask first. A lot of times people will like, if you do ask, they'll probably be like, oh yeah, sure, go ahead, take a picture, or whatever. Like people are, I think it's just respecting that boundary of like, maybe I should ask first before. I've had experiences where people would like come up and touch like, oh, like your hair. When I had long hair, people would like, oh, I like your hair. And I'm like, why are you touching my hair? So it's kind of a
Personal
weird thing,
boundaries.
but yeah. And I feel like that goes for a lot of people. Just, I mean, native or non-native. Just respect someone's personal boundaries.
Yeah.
But so that's I'm not a huge powwow Nate. I mean, I'll go to powwows, but I'm not, I don't dance, I don't participate in that. But growing up with other I feel like, because every native experience is always different, it's not always the same, and we're not a monolith of people. So like we have so many different cultures and languages and customs and beliefs. And so I can only speak off of my own experiences. I'm not a powwow dancer, but I do, practice the language. I learn the language, and I kind of, I'm not a teacher of the language, but people ask me all the time for questions like, how do you say this, or how would I introduce myself, or what do so I
Don't
wouldn't
you
call
guys
myself.
talk a little bit about the teaching the languages on your own podcast, The Brown Sound,
Yeah, so
at
we
the
do
end?
do we do a language lesson on Brown Sound, but it's just little phrases here and there. But
Mhm.
for me, I feel like the language is something that I take very serious and to heart, because my great grandpa, he was a fluent speaker, so I wasn't not familiar to hearing the language growing up. I did hear it a lot in the home and behind closed doors, but it didn't become like, I feel like, normal to hear the language or being spoken in public until like as of recent, like within maybe the last 15 or so years. I feel like I remember like growing up, for our family dinners, my grandpa would always pray in Nez Perce, or he would like say little phrases to us in Nez Perce, and we kind of just didn't really know what he was saying, because obviously, due to boarding schools and colonization, not we don't have a lot of fluent speakers, and so my parents weren't fluent, and so they didn't teach me. And but like with my grandpa, being around my grandpa, kind of helped me a little bit learn, I guess, like how things are supposed to sound. But I mean, obviously, there's always room to improve and practice. But I think that's where my strong suit is when it comes to culture, is the language. Like, there's a saying that goes like, if you're not a powwow dancer, then maybe you know the language. If you don't know the language, then maybe you know the songs. If you don't know the songs, maybe you know the roots or the foods and things like that. So I think that's important to every tribal member's experience. Like, not everyone's gonna be the best singer or the best dancer or know all the foods, but if you know something, you have you have some type of, I guess, knowledge. So That's more, I think, where I sit in when it comes to culture is language and practicing, just trying to speak the language every day at least. And I didn't really do that a whole lot growing up, but when I saw this post once, it was like, speak the language your ancestors understand you. And after seeing that, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, you know? So a lot of times when I do pray or have my time to myself, I try to always make sure I'm praying in the language so I know it's that connection to my grandpa and to my, people who came before me.
Mhm. Um, the next thing I want to talk about is kind of the cultural awareness or humility. And I came across an article that talked about indigenous cultures and how social work, education, we need to train people. We have this obligation to kind of get them to understand the difference between they learn this theory and then they learn how to practice it, but then there's the real world of like applying it. And so I'm curious on like outsiders coming into, I mean, outsider, they have this insider outsider perspective anyway in rural communities, but indigenous people, it's a little bit different of, a white person coming in and maybe not knowing the culture. A lot of times they're nervous about talking about it, asking
Hmm.
questions, or how to even kind of build that trust and understanding the cultural nuances and respecting the traditions. So, what would you recommend, or what are some recommendations, I guess, for those kind of those outsiders, the white perspective coming in to help others in the community?
Hmm. I would say like the mindset would be good, like because I feel like there's a lot of like people who come into the community with this like savior mindset of like we're here to help you and save the poor Indians. I feel like that is usually kind of problematic at times because we don't really need to be saved. I mean, yeah, we might need some help here and stuff, but like we've survived, years of colonization. So I think it depends on the mindset and how you go about it. But I think the best thing you can do, especially as someone who's non-native moving into a native community, is to go to those community events. I know for Lapwai, basketball is a big thing. So like, if you want to kind of see how we react or how we are in a basketball crowd is a lot. If anyone knows a Lapwai basketball crowd, it could be a little intimidating. So maybe start out something a little bit easier, like a powwow, or maybe like there's so many different things that go on, even just like you said, fundraisers, like showing up to support fundraisers for usually youth. A lot of the youth always try to raise money for like basketball tournaments or just whatever they got going on. So I think being present in the community shows a lot. And I think that it shows that you want to like be there and you want to learn about us and know about us and how to like how you can help us. But yeah, I think it's just showing up and just having the mindset of like, not, I don't know how to say it. Like the mindset of like you're not here to like save us, but like you're here to just, be here and live in community with us in that sense, I guess.
Yeah, and I came across another article and they talked about how a lot of times, social workers will come in and they want to fix the surface level issues
Hmm.
and not really getting the underlying issue of the historical trauma and the grief and
Hmm.
all of that stuff. And so I think that it's hard to sometimes dive into that deep stuff when you're not from that community.
Yeah.
I know that we get a lot of referrals from the tribe, and I feel comfortable doing that, but that's because I grew up there. And,
Hmm.
anytime I see anybody who's tribal, even if they don't know, I mean, most of them don't know me who are referred to me, um, I always tell them, hey, I grew up out there so that they kind of
Hmm.
know that I know that culture. And that usually builds a lot of rapport right off the bat.
Hmm.
But I think not addressing that historical trauma or just to kind of ignoring it and thinking, well, I can treat the PTSD because it's right here and it's on the
Hmm.
surface, but you're not getting anything that's underneath.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing too, is like understanding the history of like these communities and the history behind a lot of stuff. And I think too, like personally for myself, when I first started doing like therapy and stuff, I thought it was a little uncomfortable. Like, I don't know this lady, like she's not native, like I feel weird. But then I also felt really comfortable because I'm like, well, I don't know her, so I can tell her a lot of stuff and she doesn't have like that, like, I don't know, I didn't feel really judged or nothing, but I remember feeling like uncomfortable, like, I don't know if I, like, would you understand, like, me as like a brown person in Idaho is a different experience as, like, a white person or any other
Right.
person out there. So I was like, would she understand the things I go through? Like, every day when I come to work, like, I'm nervous, or I'm, scared of how I'm going to be perceived. And so, like, I work in Kamiah, which Kamiah is a part of the reservation, but there's not a huge native population here. So, like, I feel like this community is a little bit more, it could be a little bit more tricky, and the people here have a different mindset of natives. And so I feel like a lot of times when I do experience something up here in Kamiah, I'm always like, this would never happen in Lapwai, but it's crazy because we're on the reservation, but it's just a
Mhm.
completely different community. But I don't know, I think for me, I think understanding has to be like the biggest thing, like not trying to have like this already preconceived notion of like what the tribe should be, or or how, I don't know. It's just one of those things where I think yeah, I just think, just being understanding helps.
Yeah, I know somebody who they went to a doctor and they were having issues with their hair, and and this person was native, and the doctor's like, "Well, it's just hair, just cut it off." And did not even think about like how much hair is a huge
Yeah.
part of native culture, and especially for a woman, and to just cut it off
Mm-hmm.
is not like an option, and
Yeah.
so it's hard to understand that, I think, if you've never immersed yourself in the culture or never talked to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I can think of a million different ways to go about that, of like, what does your hair mean to you? Trying to get
Mm-hmm.
some of that background information before just saying, well, just cut it off. It's no big
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah,
But
and I think that's, yeah, hair has a huge, like, significance in not just our culture, but many native cultures. A lot of people say, we get our strength from our hair, and the only person that's supposed to touch your hair is either yourself or like your wife or your husband or your like mom. Not many people are supposed to touch your hair because it's such a, like, it's like a really, sentimental thing. So when you see people like doing that, I'm always like, oh, that, usually it's because you trust them, like, oh, like, well, I trust my mom to braid my hair, I trust my grandma, or but yeah, I think, and it's crazy because growing up, like, I remember being bullied for having braids in Lapwai, which is crazy. I remember growing up because back then we were. I mean, things are so different nowadays. Where like I go to a Lapwai game or anywhere in Lapwai, and I see so many young boys with long hair and braids now, and I'm like, man, that's so cool to see, because you see it out on the basketball court, the football field, or the track. You see it where it's like, okay, you're starting to see that, like, being accepted, I guess, even within our own community. But like I remember growing up, like, we always wanted haircuts, or we always wanted, if you had long hair, you were a girl, or you were, a sissy and stuff like that. And I remember when I was in kindergarten having long hair, and I used to get in fights because kids would pull it and things like that. And I remember when my cousin passed, I was just like, okay, just cut it all off, because that's another thing too. Like, when you lose a loved one, you kind of trim your hair. You don't just cut it all off, but you trim it in their memory. But I remember I was like, just get rid of it all. And ever since then, I've always had short hair. I don't know. I think it's just hair plays a huge role, though, like in identity, I think, too, and in your confidence. And I think it's cool now that, like, my nephew has braids, and he doesn't have to grow up thinking like it's not weird, or he's not the only one with the braids. Now his classmates full, So I think it's just, I think that's important to understand, is like hair plays a huge role in native communities, and especially when it comes to just seeing yourself represented like that. Because like growing up, I didn't see no one with braids, so I didn't think like, oh, it's not cool, But nowadays, you're seeing it on the in athletics and stuff, and so like these kids are looking up to these kids that have long hair, and like, so that they want their hair, and so I think that's pretty cool. But
and I think we're what, 10 years apart in school or something like that.
yeah, so
And
I'm 30, so I just turned 30
yeah,
this
so we're about
last year.
10 years apart. And I remember about 50% of the guys in my class had long hair for most of elementary school. And I just remember that very vividly. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember them cutting it if somebody died. And
Mm-hmm.
my class specifically, we had a lot of deaths, but and so I remember, freshman year, one of our classmates died, and all the guys cut their hair, and
Mm-hmm.
it was just a very big thing. And but I remember growing up in elementary school and learning about that a little more. Although we also had like after school Nez Perce language, and we had
Mm-hmm.
some lessons on the Nez Perce culture. And I remember in fourth grade when you learn Idaho history, we also learn Native American history. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but I think it kind of shifted, and then it's kind of shifting back a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, and I think I was just having this conversation the other day about like Lapwai school now seems so different compared to when I was in school with when it comes to like culture and like just language and everything. Like I mean, all of our stuff was like an elective, so we could take it if we wanted to, or you didn't, But I feel like back then we didn't have as many cultural activities like in the school system as they do now. Like, sometimes even at the basketball games, they'll have a drum group do the honor song, before the national anthem and things like that. And see, we never had that. We never had. I think Lapwai even has a powwow club now, so they have like,
That's cool.
they have that, and so we never had that. I mean, we had Nez Perce language, but it wasn't like. I feel like back then it wasn't as like forced. I think maybe too back then also we had more fluent speakers though. And now that we're at the point where a lot of our fluent speakers have passed, I think people are starting to like get a little worried, like, oh shoot, like what's going to happen. So I think a lot of people have been making the effort to learn, and I do got to give like a huge shout out to the Nez Perce language department because they do a really awesome job like in the school systems, and not just in Lapwai, but there's like Nez Perce language at Lewiston High School and up here in Kamyai. And so I think that's awesome. And even in Kamyai, like they have it at Head Start and in the schools, and this community is not really a lot of natives in those classes, so it's like, so there's the language is still being taught and spoken. It's just yeah, I think it's just really cool. So I had to give the language department a huge shout out because I
Yeah, they have it
just
also at LCSC. I saw.
oh
Um,
yeah, I took it at
yeah,
LC2 before.
yeah. I don't remember very much. I think I was really little when I took it. I think I can still count to 10, and and then all the ones, like we always said, like pits, and stuff like that. That
Yeah.
or sit on your teetsin, or just those little ones that you
Yeah.
always said when you were, um, in elementary school. I
Hmm.
I don't remember where I saw this, or it was a long time ago, but I remember reading that when you connect clients with their culture, you help build the resilience within them, and that's what promotes the healing. And I think
Hmm.
it's hard when you don't know the culture how to connect it. If somebody's coming in and they're not knowing about you or your culture, what would be a good way for them to help you connect with that? Is there questions they could ask you, or things that would help you remember maybe those some of those things, jog your
Hmm.
memory?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like for me, I think it would be good to. I mean, I'm just someone like I'm not the type to get offended by anybody. Like I'm very comfortable in who I am, and I know who I am, and I know my place in my community. So I'm always open for people to ask me any questions because I'm like, go ahead, ask me anything. Like I really wouldn't get it. Like it's like if you don't know, like I'm okay to help at least maybe shine a little light on something. So I think for me, I would just say, yeah, you can ask me anything, but I know that's not the case for everybody. Um, I think the best thing is, like I said earlier, is just showing up. I think Lapway has always. I feel like the teachers in Lapway have always done great at that, though, showing up for like sport events or just even being close with your students to like I feel like the teachers always understood that, some of these students come from, broken homes or come from, traumatic lifestyles. So I think that school has always been good at being like a safe space for students, especially. Um, so I don't know. I can't I guess I've never had to really deal with someone who came into the community that didn't understand how we operate already. Because I mean, too, in the Lapway teachers, well, I don't know now because there's a lot of new Lapway teachers,
Mhm.
but for the longest time, it was always the same teachers for a long time, so they understood, and a lot of them taught our parents or our family members. So it's like we had already this connection to them, but I think for new people coming in, it's just I think as if you can survive the res kids terrorizing, you can survive that rough class. I think you'll be fine. I remember, I mean, I that's one thing too. I res kids are really tough in that way of like wanting to challenge. Like, is this person really about? Like, are they really cool? Or see how far you can go. I decide from just my own experience. I remember classmates being crazy like that. Like, oh, do they really want to help us, or, and they would try to challenge them and stuff. And sometimes you'd be like, you guys, knock it off, like it's a little too much now. Like, you made our teacher cry, now we're all in trouble. So
Yeah.
um but yeah, I think just the best thing is just being present in the community, because I mean, I know there's a lot of people even who are from the community that claim community and do all this stuff but don't show up. So um I think that's the biggest thing, is like sticking true to your word, especially dealing with like native communities, because people are going to take you for your word. Like, okay, they said they're going to show up, and then but
Right. Because you mentioned you went to counseling yourself, do you think any of the historical trauma, the smallpox, the boarding schools, the foster care issues, and then like one of the articles I was reading was talking about how grief is so wide ranging and ambiguous because it's not, it's not somebody like you're standing next to somebody every day. Um, do you think that plays a role in your own mental health of that historical trauma piece?
yeah, I would say so. I think nowadays it's cool to see mental health being talked about openly, because back then growing up we didn't I always felt like being told like, oh, like that's a white people thing, like you're all
And
right,
everything that was
toughen
said in the
up.
home stays in the home, and you don't talk
Yeah,
about it.
yeah, you don't talk about, you don't want to, why would you bring up your family issues outside to people? Like, that's
Mhm.
embarrassing. Or, so I was always kind of like, I would hear things like, oh, just toughen up, or, like, just, quit being a crybaby, or things like that. So I feel like that on top of being exposed to grief from such a young age. I remember losing my first cousin in like 97, and then in 2000, and then losing a grandparent, and then I lost like three cousins in 1 year, my senior year of high school. So it's like, that's another thing too, is like a lot of Native communities are exposed to grief from an early age. I feel like we do attend way more funerals than we do celebrations, like graduations, weddings, or anything. I feel like funerals and things like that it's just super common. So I think on top of like being exposed to grief at a young age, and then not having the right way of like dealing with it, um, does play a huge role into mental health. But I think nowadays, especially for me and my platform that I always try to advocate for, is like, it's okay to have feelings. It's okay to go through these things and experience that stuff. Because I'm always like, well, that's what we have these feelings for in the first place, is to feel them. But I think, yeah, I think that growing up and hearing those things have played a huge role in like how I deal with stuff. But um you can always, I don't know, I feel like life is always so big, like it's never too late to learn new things. And so for me, like, I started my mental health journey last year, and at 30 years old, like, first time going to therapy and like talking about things that I thought I was over. I remember being weird at first, like, but then after, like, wow, that felt really good to like get that out and not even feel judged, or feel like
Yeah.
this person don't know me, this person doesn't know, you know who I am. Well, they knew who I was through my work, but they um didn't know me personally, so it was kind of interesting.
I think it's
But
hard to be anywhere around here and not know of people.
yeah, yeah, and
Everybody
that's
knows
what,
somebody.
and that was the longest. That was like, I think, why I put it off so long, because I'm like, I don't want to go to the clinic and someone sees me like, oh, why is he in the
Mhm.
behavioral health side? Like, because I have so many people that I know that work at the clinic too, like family members and friends, and I don't want them to think something was wrong with me, even though, like, I mean, you can go to behavioral health and be totally fine. I mean, even if there is people dealing with mental health issues, that's not, that's okay. I think now I feel like nowadays, since more people are talking about it, people are getting better at like, you know, talking about their stuff. But for me personally, growing up, I just remember like, no, we didn't talk about what happened at home. We didn't want to bring that like shame to our parents or to our family. Like that's, yeah, it just was whatever happened at home happened at home.
Yeah. And I think the services are different too on the, especially at the tribe, meaning
Mm-hmm.
health and stuff like that, is are the services available that people need? And also, are they accessible because people know people? Like you said, you walk into the clinic, you know everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it doesn't make it any easier because, the Lewiston's not that big either. And so people people know everybody there too. I remember when my husband was looking for services, I'm like, go on telehealth. Just just go on the west side of Washington or something so you don't know anybody because it's hard.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be hard to have those, especially social services or social workers, in your face if you know them
Mm-hmm.
and knowing how to do that. And so it's a fine line of, being in that community and helping, but also making it accessible so that you're not
Yeah.
and being present and going to these things, but not overly present that you're so familiar that they don't want to see you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the services now at the clinic too, they provide a lot. I mean, the behavioral health side of the services at the clinic, I feel like is really great at like bringing awareness to mental health because I work before I started doing therapy with them, I used to work with them closely for like public service announcements for the radio. So we would have these different, facts and things that we'd have during like, the different awareness months and stuff. So I feel like they do a good job at getting info out and being, accessible to the community. It just wasn't until when I started going and I was like, oh wow, like man, if I could have did this a long time ago, I probably had a different set of my 20s would probably be different, But yeah, no, I do think because I don't know if they've always had behavioral health growing up. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't have friends that I knew growing up that would go to therapy or
I don't
anything.
think
Like
they
we
got it
just
until they got the new building.
yeah, so I wasn't. Yeah, I was never. I feel like we would never. I remember the only like I feel like counselor talking to was like Mr. Wells back in like, elementary.
He was
Like
my
that.
school counselor too.
Yeah, so I think that was like the only time I've ever gone to like or ever I guess like talking to anybody about anything
But
was the
that wasn't
first.
like talking about our feelings or anything. That was,
Yeah,
I just remember like we would go in and we'd meet and play games and do
yeah,
weird
those
things.
cool
Yeah.
little the cool little like puzzles and stuff like
Hmm.
that. But yeah, no, I think that they're doing a good job. And I think too it also helps that they have some people from the community in there. But like I think they have like 3 or 4 community members who are also counselors there who help. So I know sometimes that does help, someone who looks like you and can understand where you
Right.
come from. It's easier to relate to. But if you know them personally, then because when I first started going, I remember they're like, "Oh, do you want to see this person or that?" And I'm like, "Ah, no, I know them. Like that'd be weird to go talk to them. Like they're probably like,
Yeah.
what the heck, So I was like, yeah, no, I chose a non-native counselor to speak to, and I felt like she was great. I felt like I just was like, wow, can do this all the time. But I feel like I've gone enough to a point now where I'm like, I'm okay. Like I don't need to like constantly. I mean, at the time when I started therapy too, I was like going through a lot of stuff, stress and work and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, I need to vent in a way where I'm like, I just need someone to listen to me. No.
Yeah, and I work with a lot I specialize in trauma and PTSD, so I do a lot of stuff. So like the people that, I'm getting from the tribe, we're working on I'm trying to address a historical trauma piece so that we can work on the present stuff, but the amount of mental health issues in rural communities is high, but I think especially on the tribe,
Yeah.
because you don't talk about things outside the home. So abuse is happening, trauma is happening. And like you said, death is happening. It's a part of the culture out there.
Yeah.
I think I had some more death via friends and community members than I did in my own family, just by going out there
Hmm.
or going to school out there. And I think that is a huge part in how we deal with things, especially as, we get older, is how do we deal with all of that stuff and the idea, I always, I mean, it's a joke, but it's not a joke. Like there's people either die of, car accidents, alcoholism, or
Yeah.
diabetes,
Yeah.
and part of that is that they're not getting that connection with the land anymore. They're not eating what there
Mm-hmm.
should be. I want to talk a little bit about that land connection and well, all native have it with the land, but specifically the Nimi
Mm-hmm.
Pus. Yeah, I know in one episode I was listening, you talked about the first foods and some of that stuff, and I know like sweats and stuff like that. All those different things that you do with the connection with land and with the culture and how they play a role in with each other.
Yeah, I think so growing up I remember always like going out on the land and going picking huckleberries or digging cows with my dad or just going out to the mountains and just being, on the land. I
And I didn't know
think
huckleberries were first food until I listened to your podcast about it. And I was like, I
yeah.
never knew that. I mean, growing up out there, we talked about that stuff, but that never came up. I thought that was very cool.
Yeah, so like the first foods, there's a lot of local. I mean, sometimes I don't know the words in English for them because I've always just heard them in Nez Perce. So like for cows, I remember for the longest time I'm like, it's cows. I don't know how to explain it, but they're like, oh, it's bear root, and I'm like, oh, bear
Oh, I
root.
didn't
I've
know that.
never.
I always thought it was cow
Yeah,
sprouts.
yeah, and I was like, oh, what's a bear root? But I'm like, okay, and so I think for me, what has been really helpful in my mental health journey is last year I started going back to like those traditional ways of like learning, about the Nimi spirituality before colonization and religion. So like I started, attending the longhouse services, and every longhouse service they always have a first foods meal after. So it's like you're having, the salmon, the elk, the moose, deer, the camas, kaki, huckleberries. There's all these different roots, and I feel like for me that was something that I was like. I mean, I'm not like some stranger to the Longhouse because my family in Pendleton and Nihiawe over there, they are all very traditional and grew up that way. And so I would attend those services when I was a kid with them for like funerals or just whatever they had going on. But they're, 3 hours away. So I didn't see it all the time or every weekend or as much as I probably wanted to or should. But as an adult now, kind of getting back into that way and like learning more about how our first foods and how they take care of us and they just I don't know, it's like it's hard to explain because I really feel that like the deep connection to it, to the land, and for the long it even like changed my mindset because I feel like every winter I was a really bad seasonal depression person, like ugh, I hate the winter, I hate the snow, I hate this. But then coming to find out like how the weather, even snow itself, is good for our first food, it's good for our roots, it's good for the berries. And so like even that changing my mindset on that, like okay, like the fact that we're not getting any snow is kind of scary now because like I think about our first foods now in that way of like the land needs these seasons in the winter and all that stuff. So um I don't know, it's hard to explain because I just feel like it's a very personal connection that I felt like I didn't get a lot growing up. And so like I mean, growing up I grew up very, I guess, in a very religious family. People who know my family, they know that they're Presbyterian by religion, and so I just grew up in the church and that's kind of all I really knew. And I don't know, I feel like over time, I mean, I'm not saying nothing bad on religion or anything. If that works for people, that works for them. But I feel like for me, I just wasn't feeling, I don't know, that connection, or I wasn't feeling filled with anything until I started doing like traditional Nimipu, longhouse and the first foods and eating those. And it's crazy because I was little, I used to we'd have them, like our grandparents would eat these roots and stuff. And I remember like, oh, those are sick, like not good, like they taste gross. But then as I got older and like obviously my taste buds it's changed, but like I'm like, sometimes I crave them, like, oh, that sounds kind of good right now, like some salmon and some like flitan. Flitan's one of my favorite roots. It's bitter root, but it's like I don't know the way they make it. I don't know how they make it, but it's really good. And I think the connection to that, like just knowing that this is what our people survived off of, and like knowing that these foods are there to like take care of us and we have to take care of them. I think it's just, I don't know. It's just like it's a really cool connection. I don't know. I feel like it's just one of those things where I feel very proud to be Nimi Poo and proud to like just know the importance of the first foods in our own identity and things like that. So
Yeah. Do you feel like it brings like an inner peace? Is that what you're kind
yeah,
of
I would
or
say yeah. I would say like an inner peace. Like I just feel like whenever I hear the Longhouse songs and you hear them praying for the food or blessing the food or going through the food ceremony, I just feel like it's a very yeah, like a peaceful thing, and I feel like it's something that um I don't know if it was like something my spirit is like needing or wanting or missing out on. And so now that I'm like in it again, I feel like I do feel at peace, and I feel like it has been really healing in a way. I remember when my grandma's from Pendleton. She's grew up, traditional in the longhouse over there, and they practice their ways, have always practiced their ways, and still go to church and stuff too, but like they've always practiced their traditional ways. And she told me one time, it was like probably maybe a year and a half ago or so, she was like when you get emotional hearing those songs, or if you feel something when you hear those songs or eat those foods, she's like, that's your spirit like calling you back to it, because that's what our people have done before, all of this. And so ever since then, I'm like okay, that makes sense now, because I feel like with a lot of native people who might not know or might not grow up with their traditional values like that might feel a sense of like confusion or loss. Like, I don't know really. Like, I mean, I used to go to church and do all these things, and I did feel, I enjoyed it at the time, but then I feel like, but it wasn't like I just didn't feel fully, I don't know, I guess, in it. And then
Mhm.
now that I found what like works for me, I'm like, I think this is what I was like missing out on, or this is what like my soul needed, was like to be more connected to our foods and to the land. And that's kind of what they even teach you in the longhouse. Like these foods, you're connected to them and you take care of them and they take care of you. And that's literally how it feels.
That's awesome. Another thing that I was reading about is like how so ecological systems theory talks about like the different how all these different systems within the environment and within just like there's a legal system, but then there's also the home system and the tribal system, and how these all these systems go. And they talked about how it really needs to be decolonized because it doesn't work, that systems theory doesn't work as well on with natives as it does with non-natives. And um that we have to figure out how we interact with each of these systems. The systems within the tribe, at least my experience, and maybe I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but they are very enmeshed, where they kind of build on each other. And
Hmm.
it's almost like something like an integrative care model. Like you have the elders of the tribe, but then you have the healing of the tribe, and then you have the other stuff, and you have all these things that work
Hmm.
together. How do you, if, say a white social worker comes in, how do they get that system going? And can they?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like, growing up in the community, I feel like everyone kind of has their role, like everyone like has their role in how things are done. I know, like for example, when it comes to like services, funeral services, there's usually they'll have like a head cook, and it's usually like an older lady or someone who they can trust and knows that when you cook these foods, you're supposed to cook with good intention and love, and kind of like almost like it's like a prayer in itself when you're cooking that food, so the family that's like mourning can eat the food and feel that love or the care that was put into it. But I feel like those roles are like very like important. Like I know like for head cooks usually have, you know, their maybe if they have daughters or granddaughters or family members that help them do that, and so they prepare all those meals for the families. And then you have like the people who go out and go dig graves, you know, like that's just, it's its own role in itself because it's a lot of work. Then you have the people who come in and sing to send them off. So there's like either if it's like traditional longhouse or if it's just having someone sing an honor song or you know something like that. There's just so many different roles. I don't really know how to answer that. I'm like that's a good question because I'm like there's so many important roles that go into just you know just even sending a loved one off. So like to yeah, that's a good question. I'm like I feel stumped. I'm like dang.
Well, I guess what
Um
I would do, like if I'm, I would probably contact somebody I know within the tribe of like, hey, like I've connected people with some people who want to get maybe back into beading or, into these
mhm.
things and this is on a very basic level, it's not on a systemic level, but I'm wondering if it could be applied is like, hey, let me get a release of information. Let me talk to this person, maybe connect that if you don't know them, because I know who beads and I know who wants to
Yeah.
teach people to bead and stuff like that. And so I'm wondering if it could be something like that, like just somebody, and maybe they know somebody, maybe they know
Yeah,
somebody.
and that's like how I feel like that's like exactly Lapway. Like, oh, I
Mhm.
know someone that knows someone, and they can help you. You know, like I feel like that's very on point. It's like that's like my uncle Bill. I'll be like, oh, like I'm having this issue with my car. He's like, oh, I know someone. Come look at it, and then he'll tell someone, and then like so there's like some random person. And I'm like, who is this? He's like, oh, you know, it's your Uncle Bill. Okay, if you
Oh,
know
I
my
would
Uncle
when
Bill,
I first met my husband, I would volunteer him for things, and he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "No, that's just what you do."
yeah, it's like it's just one of those things. Like if you know someone that could help
Hmm.
someone, I just feel yeah, I think that would be a good way to use those resources. I feel like too, like for the most part, people I can only talk for Lapway. I feel like most times if you do need any help or something, people will step up and try their best anyways or help where they can. Um, yeah, that's yeah. I think that's a good question, and it's crazy now because like when you said mention elders, sometimes I always forget some of our elders now are like different compared to the elders then. So I'm like,
Hmm.
wait, I don't even see you as an elder yet. Like you don't seem like you're. I don't even know what's considered elder age. I just feel like because I mean I know like I have grandparents who I'm like oh yeah they're elders, but then there's just old people that are just old. I don't know. Like I'm like what determines you an elder or just like so, because I don't know. I'm always like I don't even see. So there's certain people like oh I'm an elder and I'm like, but you're like 55 or something. I don't know. Like you know like I
Yeah.
know for the tribal services for like the senior citizens program. I know I think it starts at 55. So once the people hit 55, they're like oh I'm an elder. But it's like are you or are you just or like just because for the on the government side, you might be an
Right.
elder, but I feel like having that title of an elder is something like you have to really earn it or something, you know.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for being a guest. Is there any advice or anything that you want to leave anybody with specific to like social work coming into the tribe or services coming into the tribe or anything like that, or just about the native culture?
If I were to give out any advice to anyone coming into our community is just to be very open-minded and to not be discouraged because sometimes natives can be a little rough around the edges or could be a little closed off, but I think if you understand the history of like native communities and how they kind of came to be, just be a little bit more understanding. I mean, and I'm not trying to like co-sign on someone is being a jerk, then if they're just being a jerk, they're being a jerk. But like sometimes people are guarded because they just have been let down before, and so I think just always be open minded and be willing to learn and also willing to like take feedback because I feel like that's a big thing. Natives will be very opinionated sometimes, and even with my own job like I can't make everyone happy with working in the radio station, so I've had to deal with learning how to like when you're kind of putting those in those leadership roles sometimes you kind of have to learn when to take things serious or to take things just like let it roll off your back. I just feel like that's I don't know, having tough skin to work in Lapwai. That's probably another one. Is just make sure you're in it for the good reasons and not in it for like
Yeah.
ego, or not in it for like to say like, oh well, I helped this, this poor little community. And also just to understand that like every native experience is different. Everyone, I mean, even just my own sisters and I's experiences being native is different. We have the same parents, but just different experiences in different tribes. And I think understanding that most tribes have their own way of doing things and customs and languages and just their own belief system. I think that's important to understand too, because I've had people ask me about other tribes, and I'm like, I don't know. Like I'm only Nimipu. I can't tell you about the Navajo people. Like I've had people do that
Yeah.
before in like higher education or other things, and I'm like, I don't know. Or like, I don't know what to tell you.
We're all different.
So yeah, like I've had people even ask like, oh, did you see what happened on the Navajo res? I'm like, no, I didn't. Like, I don't know, but yeah, I just think the best thing is just always to be understanding and just to, I mean, I think even just acknowledge that, like, we're still here, we're these people. I feel like a lot of times Native voices and Native communities are looked at as this thing of the past, like we're not no longer here and we're just like this history story, but I like my thing is I always say like we're doctors and athletes and teachers and radio personalities and all these things, especially in Lapwai. Like there's so many people who have come out of Lapwai, who've done really awesome things, and so I think it's just important to just remember and to understand that like we are people and we are a thriving culture and we know how to balance living in two different worlds. Like it's tough to balance and to learn that balance, but it's
Yeah.
it's definitely doable. And yeah, other than that, that's really it. And if anyone wants to hear any more perspectives, you can always follow me on
Yeah.
the Brown Sound podcast, which is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or even the KIYE radio website. I have a lot of my interviews there where I've interviewed a lot of you know influential Native people throughout Indian country. So yeah, other than that, that's
Awesome.
all I have.
Well, thanks again for doing this, and we'll end there.
All right.